because a lot of the organizing that is happening today at this moment with this gathering began with a prayer for you at that time. Where were you? What were you doing? And what was it that brought you to Wounded Knee 1973?
Well, it was a lot of things. My folks, my name is Craig Camp, Bonka, Jabajinga is my name, Little Beaver, Bonka Fube. Was my grandpa, his animal in Native American church was a little beaver. His animal, the old Native American church, his shirt was, but when he died, the little beaver around slapped the Mother Earth, the water, and went underwater in the salt pool. And I regress a little bit to let you know who I am. But Wounded Knee was to me a spiritual awakening. I'd always been in battle. I'd always been historically in battle. We were relocation Indians, and we relocated to Kansas City. Casey and Mom and me took the train, and then the brothers were in jail, so they came up later. That was one of those things that we had also relocated to Chicago earlier, and which I wasn't part of, and Casey wasn't part of. But at Wounded Knee progressed. The American Indian movement got its what I call cut its balls, and started to pick up guns. Carter and Dennis came out to my house in 1970, and Dennis Banks and Carter Kemp came out to my house, and I said, well, right now I'm going up PG&E Towers. Why am I going to go demonstrate? You know, and at that time the American Indian movement was a demonstration group. Later it became guns, and I said, well, I'm ready. I will join when you guys fight. And brother called me on the phone and said, the fight's on. You guys grab your weapons, come on. And I was in Porterville, California at the time. And that was the time that Grace was born. She was in her mama's belly when my daughter right there was born. I had to go to Wounded Knee, and it changed my whole outlook. Wounded Knee was the spiritual awakening of this Ponca, because I had no real, as you would say, soul. I was just in it for the fight, and this man right here called Leonard Prodog, and we still go to Sundance up in South Dakota. He said, well, we're gonna dance the ghost dance at Wounded Knee, and you that don't have pipes can ghost dance. And because we had learned how to make our pipe were not pipe carriers at that time. When we came in, Crow sat us all in a circle along with Wallace Blackout, and sat us in a circle and said, this is who you are. You have the spirit of the warrior, but this spirit, I see it's all broken up and going every place. And we understood that as a people. We had been broken up. Our fist, American Indian Movement, made my family whole. American Indian Movement gave me a spirituality to go along with my instinct to fight. And my instinct to fight was always there, always present. But my understanding was lacking. And my understanding of the universe, of Mother Earth, of Grandfather, of Wakanda, was just in its babyhood. Although I was full grown and experienced Wounded Knee, there was no spirituality in my soul, in my heart, in my fight. This fight was more to those people that were pipe carriers at that time. They were fighting for a spiritual as well as a physical well-being. I don't know exactly how to put that, but it was it encompassed every living soul on the face of the earth that I had to come into contact with, and I did through the pipe, through the blood of my ancestors, through the blood, sweat, and tears. My grandfather and grandmother both walked on a trail of tears. 700 or 800 walked down from Nebraska, and we walked back. But at this time, as my sister said, we had lost our spirituality. Our physical being was intact, but we had lost our spirituality. And through Leonard Crow Dog and the American Indian Movement, I found that spirituality again, and I thank the American Indian Movement for my life. Much respect for the American Indian Movement, and everyone is a member of the American Indian Movement. Each and every soul is a member of the American Indian Movement, and we don't have to wear our you see my brothers with AIM stuff on, and I do have AIM stuff on, but we don't have to wear our regalia to be the brotherhood, the family that we are, that we as a people encompass. Each and every one of you, I thank you. I remember when this guy, Richard Whitman, and what was that, Terry Williams, walked into Wounded Knee, and they got pinned down, and we were listening to, who are those fools that got pinned down out there? And come to find out it was Rich. It was Rich and Rich and Terry. And I knew them, but just fleetingly say hi to powwow and bye to powwow. But this guy came into Wounded Knee and respected us all and fought with us, prayed with us, and became a pipe carrier itself. Without further ado, this is Richard Whitman, my brother in power and my brother chief in heart, Richard Whitman.
Jason will stand up.
Yeah, please do. As we speak, there are many stories that are going to come. I think I could listen to these guys for the next 2 days and learn full time. And I want to commend the spirit of Sherry Williams, who was murdered in the Pawnee jail. My husband and I, our eldest daughter, were pinned down in Perkins, Oklahoma, at a prayer service for my relatives at Wounded Knee. And there's another story there about the shootings that happened there and how they tricked us into many, many things. And they carried off Terry Williams and my.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, thank you for calling on me. Friends, relatives here in this beautiful ceremony. This water began in case I spoke for all of us, spoke toward us and included us. And my years began like Craig. 67, I grew up with the language, and I was adopted and raised by a grandmother, and first language of the household was my grandma didn't read or write. And I realized she was not only my first teacher, but my best teacher. She gave me another outlook to how to look at the world. And but no, at that time, late 60s, mid 60s, I was in self-denial too about being who I was, almost ashamed. Not ashamed of my grandmother, but I remember being embarrassed sometimes when she would talk Indian in front of us in a little trade store, like that. And but it reminds me now, the history. Who owns history?
Mm-hmm.
We own our personal histories, our family histories, because our Indian history is owned by non-Indians, or historians, or politicians. I remember I was at the Indian school, Santa Fe Indian School, 1967, 68, and some of these students would go back home for Christmas, Thanksgiving break. I remember the Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Anishinaabe students from the Minneapolis area kept coming back and saying, "Oh yeah, there's a new organization, AIM." And so, we were at the Indian school, so we were looking for a way. How can we push back? We had a lot of pain and anger. I wanted to direct it. I didn't see us on the evening news, civil rights movement and Students for Democratic Society, all those organizations. It was only like 69 when I seen Alcatraz on the evening news, The thing about the Indian school, it was students from the Northwest, Washington, Oregon. They talked about their tribe's history, about the fishing rights, the 50s, ongoing. And the other tribes would bring their information, and saying, well, there's always been a struggle. In other words, our people have always struggled since this first encounter. And I can only echo what Craig says too, Came to Wounded Knee, armed. I was also armed with a camera, an old beginner's camera, an old Pentax 1000 that I borrowed. Film, not digital, but film. Then I traded that one in and handed me another kind of a rifle. another kind of weapon. But I remember all the confrontational politics of AIM, you know, to get attention, to get the media. I also know, like it says, Crow Dog, that the movement has to have a spiritual center.
Mm-hmm.
And that began that for us. Reintroduced us all to and they shared that with us. Their ceremony, that lodge. Crow Dogs, and Leonard Crow Dog and Henry Crow Dog, Wallace Blackout. So right where this lodge is sitting, this is where the slaughter of 1890, women and children, elders. The blood is right below us. We're sitting on it now in this lodge. So then that revived me, like Craig says, the spirits begin to have the spiritual center back to us. That take the pledge. Brother Carter said, am I vowing all these young men to die? Am I going to be responsible for their deaths? So it was a heavy thing on him. But he left it to us to commit to that as well. So that kind of education I got there, and to this day, you know,
Leave it alone. It's going to make
we made a relationship or kinship. When I got there, I ran into these guys that I had gone to Indian school with. They were from Rosebud and Pine Ridge. So I was reconnected with them. So they asked me to hang with us. Knew I was on their res. They knew the language. They knew the politics. They knew the families that were supportive and the families that were divided on the Goon Squad side. And but anyway, I prefer to take questions.
We'll move along in a little bit. So all of the times that they're talking about their Wounded Knee, there were things that were happening all across Turtle Island that were in support of Wounded Knee. One of the things we just mentioned about a Pawnee brother named Terry Williams. These guys with the sign are really funny. I think, if we don't get that fixed right now, let's leave it alone until later so that we can pay attention to what's going on here. That I don't know how many friends we lost during that period of time that were murdered. I know that all across the globe right now, that indigenous land care, the people who care for the land and the water and the waves are being murdered. And so it was nothing new during that period of time. And as I listen to my brothers speak about taking up arms, it makes me look around at us right now, us who feel as if we're outspoken, us who feel as if we're standing up. How many of us would be willing to do that right now? To take a stand on behalf of the people and pick up arms and lay our lives down, if necessary, for the people. Because it wasn't a one-time thing. They're talking about days there in Wounded Knee, months there in Wounded Knee, among your people. They're talking about a journey that began with their lifetimes of being born into a situation that was out of control, with the Bureau of Indian Affairs telling us everything that we were supposed to do and be until we were completely annihilated. And then comes the warriors that literally stood in the path with guns drawn and said no more. That may be a start, it may be a continuation of the survival story that brings us all here today. But the topic of destruction, interesting little slip there, discussion today was about stopping the destruction of our culture and how Wounded Knee and the American Indian movement brought about the organizational process that we're in right now. You know, I see Heather over here, and I'm thinking about her with the movement in Canada when she was one of the originators of the National Youth. What was the name of the youth group up there? Native Youth Movement in Canada. You know, I'm seeing one of you with different organizations wherever you are and with whatever you're doing in the backgrounds that you're connected to right now. How many of those can be traced back to that period of time? So I'm going to ask my brothers another question, then we're going to open it up for your questions. But very, very succinctly, after Wounded Knee, you all came here, back home. We had, I believe, 37 chapters of the American Indian movement that Brother Carter had been part of the reason that they happened. And the organization was on the ground. We had to go physically to the places, you know, us with the cook pots, those of you with the front lines. Bureau of Indian Affairs were taken over in Pawnee, many other places. Schools were closed down. Students with long hair, the young boys, had to have your voices speak for them. You opened the doors often to people like Martha Grass, Lily Carson, other grandmothers, so that they could walk in and say what was necessary in their communities. Viola Hatch, Frances Wise's mother, many others, Gladys, that was her name. How do you see that influence from those days, or maybe an instance of a time that you participated in, and how did that play into Standing Rock, into today? How do you see those organizational processes morphing into this particular time? And I'll ask you, Brother Craig, and you can pass it to Brother Richard.
I think as I came out of Wounded Knee and came home to the Ponca Reservation, there was absolutely no housing, no cohesive unit of dissent among the Poncas. Half of them liked the American Indian movement, half of them were totally opposed to it. I mean, just don't ruffle feathers. We've been getting along, and I said, you know, you've been surviving, but you haven't been thriving, you know, and until we take control of the tribe, not by the American Indian movement, by Poncas, and I'm sure it's the same with every other tribe. A cohesive fist fights. With 5, make a fist. You know, with 8 clans, you make 2 fists. You know, and there was always the coming of the 8th clan. Supposedly, I don't. There's 7 clans, and the 8th clan. I know it's out there. the 8th Clan, but I don't see the 8th Clan as the answer to everything. I think we have to sustain ourselves within ourselves to prosper. That's my feeling, and perhaps there should be more or less American Indian movement, or more or less. But it's up to each individual, and each tribe, where they want to do. To my sister, I want to say that the American Indian movement, every entity of resistance that led us, the American Indian movement is a partial answer, but it is not the answer. I mean, the American Indian movement is important, and I thank the American Indian movement for my life, but each and every one of us in our own homes have to respect each other and the water and the mountains and the earth, and otherwise I just don't see us.
So in terms of organizational process, that we're tying, this time for Wounded Knee as being a big time, that the American Indian movement was the impetus. To today, you're saying that and what I'm hearing is that you're saying that the transition has individualized.
I think that the American Indian movement is a partial answer, but it can't be a total answer,
Yeah.
We need to stand up and fight for what our rights are, but the American Indian movement will not be here fighting
Right.
in each home.
Right. Right.
We need to fight on our own turf, for our own turf, for our Mother Earth,
Gotcha.
for our land, and
Okay.
and like that. As far as other entities, I think the American Indian movement, for me, was the answer. And dissent, I know that there's those that say the NIYC was a good thing. The American Indian movement. I think every Indian needs to stand up and take account of themselves and fight, and fight for what's real. And as far as every American Indian movement was a good starting place. For now, forever, for always.
Okay. All right. Brother Richard, do you see, I hear what my brother Craig's saying as part to taking on the women's drum from our mama, and going deeper into our own punkaways and expressing sovereignty through every way that we could. And let's say that the American Indian movement was the spark that started that fire within all of us, and the spirituality was already there, and it was part of what began that fire as well. How do you see that manifested in today's indigenous global movement that is larger than it's ever been. Can you see the ties or the trails?
Well, I would say pain served its purpose and gave us visibility. 60s and 70s, I remember these Europeans were at Crow Dog, and they said when AIM happened, they were from Austria, somewhere in Belgium. They said in Europe, they think all American Indians are gone, dead. And when AIM, Wounded Knee made international news, national news, they were surprised that Indians were still in America, still alive. But AIM, I was in the National Leadership Council. We made some mistakes. And we had maybe some poor strategies, planning strategies. But it was a grassroots movement for me. Indian car. Today I wouldn't think about getting in a car and driving. Back then we went. I see some of that old footage. Like Indian cars or Indian residents or Indian communities. It was like we were like 10 years behind or 20 years behind in automobiles. Whatever was new, we were driving those vehicles in gold. But you know, in the 70s, late 70s, those things, Indian Child Welfare Act, you know,
Right.
American Indian Religious Freedom Act,
Right.
you can't directly tie them to AIM, but they put the focus. And yes, we had those divides in our Indian communities. A lot of our people say, well, it's not the Indian way. It's not the Indian way to do this. Protests or practices or confrontational. Trail of Broken Trees 72, I remember
True.
the National Tribal Chairmen's Association. They denounced AIM for taking over the Department of Interior there. And years later, I met some tribal chairmen, retired, and they said they had to make that statement. They were directed to. But underneath the table, some said they were glad AIM did that, came there that year. And they said, we couldn't even get in to see the Department of Interior heads, Bureau of Indian Affairs. At least when AIM was there for 72, they got access to, I think it was Lewis Bruce was the Commissioner of Indian Affairs then.
Outside.
Some, you know, and then, once again, they put the tension on as well. The Indians trashed the building, you know. During that, Williams and some friends of mine seen some artwork there in the BI building, arts and crafts that came from Santa Fe. And there him cut my painting out of the frame, rolled it up, and then that Wounded Knee over in Rosebud, they took me to a little, it was in the winter time, so they took me to a little square building. And there was a wood stove, grandpa and grandma sitting around it. And they had put their beds built on the side of the wall with a little space for kitchen, and everything was built around a fire to keep warm. And so I want to show you something. The family had got every kind of insulation found and layered the inside to keep warm. And there was everything nailed up in there, not just cardboard, asphalt, roofing, everything. Commodity boxes, And he pointed up there, and there was my painting. But they had nailed it up against the speaking wall in a way to make it visible. And then it was not just a humbling moment, it was an emotional moment for me. I said, there, why would my painting be in Washington, D.C., Department of Interior? This is where it is. This is where I walked outside. I felt kind of helpless and emotional. But right then and directly where I was conscious or not conscious of it, that experience that night made me vow or revow, made me vow. I always love my people, whatever those circumstances. And but it made me realize too, why should my art be in a kind of federal building and returns back to the people? But, yeah, I think in some ways, as Brother Craig says, gave us a little respect within our communities too. See someone stand up who could come in and work with our people. And I think that when AIM ended, I looked back toward Oklahoma. So maybe we can do something back home, you know. And I think a lot of the people who all went back to California or wherever they were from, Arizona, New Mexico, gave us a sense of that, you know, I think, to do some, you know, form their own survival schools, Indian schools, language. We were part of those programs, language, sobriety programs, mental health, and so there was, I think, there were a number of things, you know, in the late 70s, you know, like I say, American Religious Freedom Act, you know, and can openly be who we are. It takes a law. There's a law that forbid it. So, I don't know if I can answer the question though.
You know, it's answering within me as you both speak. It's answering within me. I'm kind of hearing my own answers to this. I think that today's jargon would give it the words saying that was the beginning of the hardcore decolonization process.
Yeah.
Does that fit for all of you? Does that seem to you as if that's part of that reality? Is, you know, there's different ways that people speak these days, and even in terms of people who are two-spirit, the honor in our communities was always there. We never did ask the questions, you know, who are you and what are your core values? You just are who you are. And that's the way the traditional people always were in those terms. And it also is part of that, for me, has been, you know, the joke of having to have a CDIB, a Certified Degree of Indian Blood, to prove who you are, when you know through your own DNA and the stories and the histories that have come through your families who you are. And we had those too, and that's when those cards were first coming out, and people in the cities were beginning to say, look, we can prove who we are, this is who we are, and we're like, you mean you didn't know? Because this is part of our identity as humans, is to know who we come through history and to be proud of every portion of it and every bit of it. So when I hear you two talk, all of those things are awakened in me and more. I want to acknowledge a couple of people in this room real quick with Jo K. Dow and her family's relationship with the American Indian movement from the get-go. To us, she was still a baby and a bit of an upstart in the 1980s, but you know, she was hardcore from the get-go. I want to acknowledge your relationship with the American Indian movement and your people's ways that, these guys would go wherever they were called. It didn't matter if it was Quapaw, didn't matter if it was Washington, D.C., to take over the BIA or Pawnee or wherever it was. I want to acknowledge my husband, Michael Hornick, as one of the main warriors during the American Indian movement. I was really an irritated young mother because these guys were on the road all the time. And I was like, and I just get to sit here, you guys. And now I'm at the age that I can say, thank God you did what you did. Wakanda Wigaha. For these warriors in my life who took on the world and let me be at home with my children, allowed me to nurture a new generation of warrior women and men who then carried that impetus into their lives and demanded that the schools allow the long hair for men and women, who demanded that their children be kept correct history within their minds, as Brother was talking about, Brother Richard, that, history has belonged to what they call the conquerors. They're liars. They're just liars. Now, there's reasons that we're gathered here today. And those reasons started long before us, but blossomed into a full-blown movement. I worked with Shannon on movement rights, but it's movements that are changing the whole face of Indigenous America and Indigenous people globally. To be able to stand up and to separate ourselves. I can talk a bit. Joe Kay tells me that dinner is getting close.
We're getting close, yeah.
What I'd like to do is open it up to specific questions that you might have for either one of these Wounded Knee OGs.
Casey, if I could say something, I know these men here now for many years, and I really have a lot of respect for you guys. I know they won't say, they're not, I know how they are, they're not gonna brag on themselves. But, being a younger person in those days, I was still in high school. My folks said, no, you're gonna stay here and go to school. And I didn't understand it then, I was angry, but, the thing I have seen over the years and observed is that so many seeds were planted everywhere. Richard just named a couple of things. All of the organizations that came out of Wounded Knee. And I don't know, when Craig was talking, I was thinking, that thing, the spirit spread. The thing that I get a little annoyed about too that came out of that, my observation again, I'm only speaking for myself, while we have respect for our tribal governments and the tribal chairmen, I think they benefited a lot from the American Indian movement.
You're right.
We wouldn't see these big casinos. We would not see these big clinics and healthcare centers had it not been for them. Because prior to that, a lot of tribal chairmen, I can speak for my people at Quapaw, and I've heard them say it publicly. Back in the 70s, we had to get money out of our own pockets to have a telephone. We were in a shed answering a telephone that we put in. And, look at the tribes now. So in a way, their bravery and the risk they took was kind of co-opted, sometimes for reasons they weren't intended, I think. But two, it's kind of a two-sided coin. We benefited from those things too.
Right.
And they enable us to be able to gather at places like this. So they brought about so much change, everyone who was there.
It would take us a long time to
Yes.
say. I also want to acknowledge Jimbo Simmons here, who is part of the American Indian movement and has been, right at this particular moment is still working for a very close friend of all of ours, that is the most well-known prisoner of war of the indigenous nations. And he'll be talking later this afternoon. Maybe we can talk a little bit about Leonard Peltier as one of the sacrificial people that's still behind bars right now. He works within that framework to help bring that awareness. I'm sure each one of you has a story. I know my little relatives from Texas down there proudly wear their AIM gear everywhere I run into them. When I say little, that means young, because you're not little ones. My younger relatives, I should say. Yeah, and of course that's where we met, was through the American Indian Movement, Nancy. Does anybody have any direct questions they'd like to ask of the brothers up here? A way that you might have been inspired by the stories of Wounded Knee. Over there, I see a hand up.
So like, when you think of like Wounded Knee, like, think of all the previous defenders and protectors and, you know, like losing Buddy Lamont during the siege was very traumatic. And first of all, like, you know, thank you for going before and carving this pathway for my generation. Because as someone who's directly in movement, I can't imagine like what, you know, what Tony and Casey Cap or Tony's dad white through. Like, I don't have to explain to anyone what white privilege is because of that generation.
Yes.
And I'm really thankful for that. But my question is, like, when you go through a traumatic experience like that in movement spaces, what's the best way that you recommend to grieve in movement? Because we don't have a choice, we can't stop. We have to keep moving, we still have to keep coordinating. How do we grieve in movement spaces?
And may I ask a little bit of clarification? When you talk about grieving, are you talking about grieving individually, like we know how to go through a process with our tribe, our family members, etc.? Are you talking about the larger pain?
I was thinking of like Buddy, like losing him during the siege was really traumatic. But they didn't stop.
Right.
They didn't stop at all. Like how were you guys able to do that? Because I'm trying to figure that out. Like how do you grieve and still stand?
Either of you brothers?
That's interesting too, Buddy Lamont. I think it, again, very impactful in the beginning of the end, ending, you know, and then, you know, as you know, Brock Phil's calling all the ceremonial elders about being responsible for other deaths, you know, and of course, Agnes Lamont, his mother, you know, talked about her people in the mass grave, and now her son. And, you know, I know Vietnam veterans post stress they bring home with them. My older brother had it, and my grandma's away, we kind of lost this ceremony for the returning warriors. And he was a mean drunk. He died. It wasn't like that when he left. He came back. Red cars, fought like I was thinking about Buddy Lamont, but, his mother expressed that, our people are already there now on the side. Then elders had to really consider that too, There was kind of a divide there about ending it then on that. Once again, there was the military surrounding us, and Buddy was a Vietnam vet, and there was another military gun used in Vietnam that the sniper uses on him. So it was a message I felt that they were trying to send to break that kind of. I don't hook this song, I read it. I remember one day it was a clear day at Wounded Knee, and everybody was doing their laundry kind of, pumping water, and we had found this old surveyor scope kind of a thing that I guess they used in the 50s, 60s maybe. So we put it up on these blocks, and we could scope the perimeter of where the feds were set up at around us. We'd take turns at it. And my turn came, and looked in, I put it on a little hillside of where this one federal camp was. And all of a sudden, there was a guy looking straight at me, and he was a sniper with his scope, long scope. The length of the rifle with his scope. He was looking right at me. I never had that kind of eye contact. Looking straight at me. And then I call my friend over, come look at this guy. All of a sudden he goes like this to me. The other guy said, come on, get away from her, man. He said, you know what he did? All he had to do was pull the trigger on you, man. He's letting you know he can take you out anytime. Huh? I said, wow. That was a life lesson for me right there. Just kind of eyeball to eyeball. But no, I don't know if I could answer for Buddy, But
how do you
in some ways, we've all had this carry over the age of stress, whatever, carried it with us, and I think veterans do, and I'm sure the Lamont had it as well. Other losses.
Brother Craig, I'm not sure if you could hear her question.
No.
She said that she had got a soft voice. I don't. But she was relative to Buddy Lamont they gave. And she felt like they never could grieve because he was lost inside there. And then in this ongoing movement, ongoing way of life that we've all chosen, how do we come to grips with not being able to grieve? Is there any advice you have for her?
No, not really. Grieving is pretty personal. And somebody who died in combat that gets shot like Buddy, I was there when he got shot, and for a person to get shot in combat, there is no mourning that is sufficient for the family. I mean, they're gone in combat, and that's what they would choose to be in combat. Buddy, although I served a little bit earlier than Buddy in Vietnam, it's like people that died in combat through history, they were happy to die for the people, you know, and they're although you mourn him, but we celebrate Buddy Lamont, Great Clearwater, you know, for their heroic giving of their life against all odds. We're sitting down, they encompassed all the high ground, and we were sat down in the bowls. And they were just, my brother was talking about meeting eye to eye. Well, it might have not got there. You could see like we were shooting across Wounded Knee Creek, and we were shooting a long ways, and you just got to be lucky. And those guys had high-powered sniper weapons that could actually reach us, and we didn't have shit really. They could reach them, and they could see you, and they'd have to ask the commanding officer, well, it's all right if I kill this dirty redskin, you know. And if they thought so, well, we'd be dead, you know. And it was just that choice that Buddy Lamont knew damn well that he was holding court right there. I got my arms, now you got arms, you know. Just the American End movement was real good at getting attention by confrontation, and confrontation led to Buddy Lamont's death, you know, and there's no grieving really. Bless your family, bless you people, you know. Well, I speak, I know for Rich and my brother over here, that we knew the risk going in. We knew the risk going in, and it was just it's like my brother Carter Revard. He came in when the media was in there. He came in. He got a media pass and came in, and he asked me succinctly, why did you come in? And I said, well, now they got to answer to the gun. Mm-hmm. Now they got guns and we got guns, and it's time. Uh-huh. It's time. We brought all this to the head, and God bless you. You know, and that's just the way it is.
Thank you, brother. Yeah. I've got a little bit of an answer there as well. Every time that AIM song is sung, the spirit is honored. And the spirit of all of those are honored that have made the ultimate sacrifice for us. You know, every time. But it also brings me to mind of the times, where's my Ponca relatives here? Of being the times that our folks were on the forced removals from wherever we were. And we had to leave people on that trail and keep going for the generations to come. We didn't have that moment to grieve. And it brings me to 2020, when COVID raged through our reservations. And we couldn't be there for those 4 days and do the things that we knew that we needed to do. Our grief as indigenous people is again part of that DNA that we carry. You know, I had saw a guy up in the Bay Area when I was young, probably in the 40, when I was about 40, but he had been acquitted of murder because the judge said all Native Americans, and that's who we were then, are victims of PTSD, and that man was murdered another behind that pain, behind the ways of not being able to breathe. So personally, myself, the way that grief can be dispersed is through the ceremonies we had today, through the memorial songs that are sung, through this, and carrying that power like you always do on his behalf. Now, I wish that my other sons were here to be able to sing that AIM song for you all, because most of us can't carry a tune real good. We have a comment here, and then I'm going to kind of offer this back to any closing remarks by my brothers. We've got to move into another segment, and then lunch is waiting for us. So, Jimbo Simmons.
I just want to say that I was there at the 50th anniversary of Wounded Knee. And I go kind of like by symbolisms, you know, how you're there for a reason. And if you're listening and if you're there, you know, the elements will talk to you. And I always tell wherever I go, and when I'm asked to talk, particularly about the American Indian movement, I try to go to Wounded Knee. I was in the Army, and I went AWOL, but I never made it. I got turned away twice. But and I was in a boarding school in the 70s, Fort Sill, and I participated in occupation there in October of 72. And I remember the names that we have here. Francis and Viola, and even my mom at that time. She was involved in AIM, but I didn't really know because that's how young I was and didn't know the direction that was happening. But my
Quit
brother,
showing off, man.
Yeah.
You know that.
but my brother, my younger brother, we're the same age, 10 months apart, and his name was Larson. And he was a good friend of Carter. You know, him and Carter got along real good. And I owe that to a lot of them. But I always tell people, if it hadn't been for the warriors of Wounded Knee, we wouldn't be where we're at today. And particularly the international movement. Because that was what woke up the attention of the world.
Yes.
And today we have a lot of things going on around the world globally. A lot of issues happening, and one of them is water.
Yes.
And I heard a relative at the United Nations just recently, a young man, talk about the water, about being his relative, and how that relative is calling to us.
Right.
So today I believe that strongly. So when we came, the warriors of Wounded Knee set the groundwork for Standing Rock.
Yes.
Standing Rock for the water.
Yes.
And that water is still calling to us, even today. And for me personally, in a sense, because that water that my companion took to that ceremony was from the Broken Bow Lake, they call it. Before they built that lake, my great-grandfather, that's where his original allotment is. And they flooded it out. He was one of the original families in that area called Ho Chi Town. And if you know that area, Ho Chi Town has become a big tourist area. But Ho Chi Town was a stronghold of traditional Choctaws, those that didn't want the allotments, those that were against. They said if the allotments came, we're going to lose our culture. And we can see that happening today. So when I was there recently, I went to that lake, and I went to there specifically to look for this area where my great-grandfather's original allotment was. But it's underwater. And before, a couple years ago, when I first came here, I found his grave. And he was reburied, taken from Ho Chi Town and reburied in that new area. And that whole area was flooded out. So that kind of put some questions to me about the water. And that's where that water came from, was from that area. But I didn't get it from the tourist side. I got it from the east side. Because on the east side, you can see, there's hardly anything on that east side. There's a few people living out there. But anyway, the water is very important. And I believe that what they did in 73 is what we're coming. And I heard the comment earlier today with my sister when she said, what do we call it? Water, oil, or what? No, it's going to be the water wars. And that's what's going to happen. That's what's up ahead of us. Only 3% of the water in the world today is drinkable. I remember a time when Philip here said, we're going to pay more for water than the gasoline. And it's already happened. So if you're paying $3 for water, you times that to this. And that's what you're paying. Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that because I believe strongly that what they're saying here today is that call. And this word here, the Lakotas call it, they don't say memory, they say legacy. So what we're offering and what that song, like my sister talked about, when we sing that song, it's in honor, in memory, and it's a legacy that all our brothers, all our sisters, that they carry on. So I just wanted to say that because I'm very thankful for these guys for making that stand because we wouldn't be here today.
Thank you very much. Does anybody here know the AIM song? Does anybody have that AIM song? One? I'm looking at you. Jason. All right, I would, my brothers, I'd like to ask you to stand up here and let us honor you with that AIM song. You guys can still stand up, right?
Hold on, I'll tell her you're talking.
Yes.
I have my hands on.
Where is it? Oh, it's okay. We'll just go ahead. We're at this point right now. All of you, Brother Michael, Joe K, come stand with these relatives right here.
Yeah.
will shake hands with your brother and all of you can turn around and shake hands.
Remember my grandson? Wyatt, he had that long braid.